Good afternoon, everyone. So we will go ahead and get started. My name is Arlene Valley. I am the Interim Dean of Academic Affairs, Research and Assessment here at Bunker Hill Community College, and welcoming all of you to day 2 of our Equity Institute. I have the distinct honor of introducing both our moderator for this afternoon's conversation and our featured guest. Our moderator this afternoon is Limuchi Frazier, a public fiber artist, an innovator, a poet, and a holographer. Limuchi is the Director of Education and Interpretation for the Museum of African American History in Boston and also in Nantucket. For over 15 years, she's been engaged in highlighting and curating the museum's collections and its exhibits, providing place-based education and interdisciplinary history programs, projects, and lectures. She's an adjunct faculty at Pine Manor College in Massachusetts and has worked closely with us here at Bunker Hill Community College over the years with our faculty and students. She's served the artistic community for over 20 years as an award-winning national and international visual and performance artist and poet with residences in Brazil, Taiwan, Costa Rica, Africa, France, and Cuba. Limuchi is a member of the Women of Color Quilters Network. She's a resident artist of African American Artists in Residence program at Northeastern University and at Fairmount Innovation and the South End Technology Center, as well as MIT Fab Labs here in Boston. Her fiber work serves to document history and memory and often include innovative technology. Her work is featured in a series entitled The Quilted Chronicles. She also has work in the permanent collections of the Museum of Art and Design, the Smithsonian Institute, and at the White House. Limuchi, it's an honor to have you here with us today, and thank you for joining us. I look forward to you moderating the conversation with our featured speaker. And our featured speaker this afternoon is none other than Professor Claudia Rankine. She's an accomplished poet, an essayist, a playwright, and an editor of several anthologies. She's authored 5 volumes of poetry, 2 plays, and numerous essays. She is the Frederick Eisman Professor of Poetry at Yale University in the Departments of African American Studies and English, and a former chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. In fall of 2021, she will be joining the NYU Creative Writing program as a professor of creative writing. But Professor Rankine is also a genius. And this is not just the opinion of a fan and a fellow islander. Among the many honors, awards, and fellowships that she's received is the MacArthur Foundation's Genius Award, which she received in 2016. Professor Rankine masterfully weaves together poetry, essays, visual imagery, and has a sharp, direct critical analysis that she weaves into her explorations of race, racism, and racial relations in the United States. She produces absolutely pure works of art. In addition to the MacArthur Foundation Award, she's received the Bobbitt National Prize for Poetry, the Poets and Writers Jackson Poetry Prize, and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, from the Lannan Foundation, United States Artists, and the National Endowment for the Arts. In 2017, using funds from her 2016 MacArthur grant, she co-founded the Racial Imagery Institute, an interdisciplinary collective that is committed to democratizing the exploration of race in our daily lives. Professor Rankine's 2014 critically acclaimed work, Citizen, an American Lyric, won the PEN Book Award and the PEN Literary Award. It won the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work in Poetry and the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry. The book was also a finalist for the National Book Award. There's one piece in Citizen that examined society and the media's treatment of Serena Williams, and in a conversation about what it's like being a Black body in a white space. really interesting when we think about that juxtaposed with recent news around Naomi Osaka's interaction over the past few days, and really reveals how poignant and relevant Professor Rankine's work is. In fact, her work is evergreen. And for us, as we think about the Institute and we think about her work, we are grateful that we have her work and the work of other Black and African American writers to be in constant conversation with each other and to mirror across unchanged realities through time the experiences of Black and African American people in the United States and around the world. In praise of her most recent publication, Just Us, which was published just last fall, acclaimed author Viet Thanh Nguyen called her one of the essential thinkers about race, difference, politics, and the United States. And I couldn't agree more. Professor Claudia Rankine, welcome to BHCC's 2021 Equity Institute.
Thank you. All right. So we are so blessed to have you, Claudia Rankine, Dr. Claudia Rankine, in the Boston area. You've been on residency here, and we've been able to see what you produce in your genius of playwriting and your process. So I'm just going to ask our audience, just so we can get right to you, to join me as we acknowledge that we are in indigenous territory of the Massachusetts Nation. If they would please join me in welcoming you to the platform that has been rendered to us as a digital podium today, and that we may be able to hear your words and hear a reading by you that is pleasurable in whatever you have to say, that is critical as a critic in American society, as an author, and as a giving person in this environment of trouble that we have been in. So would you please read for us from your book, Just Us, An American Conversation, Dr. Rankine.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That I'm thinking, who are they talking about? I'm just trying over here to put words down on paper, but I will begin by reading a chapter from Just Us, my most recent book of essays, An American Conversation. The chapter is entitled Big Little Lies. It's in conversation. I don't know if you saw the series with Nicole Kidman and Reese Witherspoon, but it is in slight conversation with that television show. I'm speaking to a white friend about the class breakdown in the television series Big Little Lies. Economic stability or instability gets communicated by the size and location of the different characters' homes. My friend and I live in similar houses with comparable layouts and approximately the same square footage. This is perhaps why I make the careless mistake of putting us in the same class category as Reese Witherspoon's character in the show. I say we are represented by the couple whose nice house doesn't overlook anything, water, cliff, or any other natural wonder. This claim hasn't completely left my lips before I'm stalled by the thought that I have no inherited wealth. I didn't have a choice about whether to work outside the home while raising my child, as my friend did. And. I recant as quickly as possible as I claim the twinning based on the similarities of our home's layout. It's an odd error to have made. But my friend and I do have lives that look similar. Both of us are writers with equivalent educational backgrounds, life traumas, and aspirations for ourselves and our families. We have known each other much of our adult lives, and perhaps affection and familiarity made me momentarily oblivious to our differences. Our economic histories point in part to our racial histories. Not that there aren't individual Blacks wealthier than my friend, but typically, even if we arrived in the same dorm room, we don't actually wind up in the same place economically, since whites have a median net worth that is 10 times that of Blacks. Our different races have positioned us in the world in radically different ways. Her wealth goes back to the Mayflower, and her white Anglo-Saxon positioning is how she explains many things about her life. My own immigration from a previously colonized country, naturalized American citizenship, and status as a first-gen college-educated Black woman account for much about me. Any attempt to erase these differences ultimately destabilizes us. Because despite our many connections, despite sitting across from each other, we have been pushed out of a structure from opposing ends through the doorway of our shared culture to sit across from each other. I begin to remember all the turbulence and disturbances between us that contributed to the making of the moment, this moment of ease and comfort. After my friend's departure, I pick up my mistake like a snow globe and turn it over in my mind. My assumption reminds me of a comment made by a white man on a flight I took. I don't see color. Like him, a lack of discomfort allowed me for a nanosecond to disregard history and the institutional structures put in place to predetermine that my friend and I can never slip on sameness. Was my slip up simply a misplaced desire to calcify our connection? Or is there more? Was the slip an otherworldly desire to become my friend, take on the trappings of her white life and form a semblance of equality that can never exist? I understand that my need even to ask this question is formulated within a white-centered framework that believes all aspirational life is towards whiteness. The framework of white hierarchy has been behind the making of a culture I am both subject to and within. Consequently, I know how easily my actions could be formed by it. Why not want the thing that offers the most lasting and stable, if at times toxic and dehumanizing, value? The life I've made is my life, and though it overlaps with what's also desired by white people like my WASP friend, our homes, for example. There are agendas that build precariousness and trauma into my professional success I have achieved that must remain more primary for me. An essential desire for equity and the ability to live freely without the fear of white terrorism literally trumps everything, as former First Lady Michelle Obama expresses in her book, Becoming. Unless something structural shifts in ways that remain unimaginable, the life my friend has is not a life I can achieve, ever. Her kind of security, because it's not merely monetary, is atmospheric and therefore is not transferable. It's what reigns invisible behind the term white. It doesn't inoculate her from illness, loss, or forfeiture of wealth, but it ensures a level of citizenry, safety, mobility, and belonging I can never have. Neither of us is baffled by our particular random, well-earned, unearned, historical, or inherited differences. It is, in fact, my friend's ability to grasp and hold our differences that creates both our facility with each other and our antagonisms. But why, even for a second, translate ease with each other into a state of sameness? If no sameness of status is possible, even within my closest white friendships, how to account for closeness? What forms of relation can include knowledge of historical dynamics and societal realities without preventing or interrupting intimacy? If similarity and sameness are essentially impossible, how is difference recouped and realigned with closeness? How do we keep all the differences on the table and call that a friendship? I long to trust in our feelings of closeness, a closeness years in the making, that wrestled racism and racist assumptions to the surface of our hurt feelings and profound disappointments. I wish to stop time and have feelings of intimacy blanket all time, both historical time and the years that took us from our late 20s into our late 50s. But to stop being conscious of my friend's innate advantages is to stop being present inside our friendship. To remember the truth of us is to be in the truth of us, in all its realities and all its stumbles and slips. Then our friendship is what allows us to fall away from the ease of intimacy without falling. My friend already knows the truth of her life before I call it forward. Her ability not to push aside the moment of my self-correct, a moment that happens with language that seems to distance us from each other in its effort to know precisely, points to her ability to hold and recognize her advantages, her disadvantages, her whiteness, alongside my Blackness, my disadvantages, and my advantages, despite our similarities. The two-step, just us, no, you and I, that I enacted is one she, I hope, kept in step with. I doubt she would have corrected me had I not corrected myself. But that aside, together we allowed racial difference, as constructed as it is, as real as it is, not to become for us a source of acrimonious silence. Our fortitude, our resilience with regard to each other's differences becomes, in day-to-day life, our friendship. Still, when I asked her to respond to an earlier version of this piece, she said she had no thoughts of interest. I kept wondering how she, a writer with a wealth of thoughts and imaginings, had suddenly gone bankrupt.
Wow. There is so much in what you have said. Thank you so much for that wonderful reading. And I want to ask here, as you began Big Little Lies as a chapter, you introduced this idea of real estate, of land, of home, of wealth, and those comparisons. Can you speak to why you began there in terms of America and this whole underpinning of property and what that means?
That's a great question. I was really interested in the statistics that your zip code equals your possibilities in life. And that has stayed true. Where you grow up, what schools you have access to, they can map out how far you can move economically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really interested in taking a real moment. I mean, this really happened. We were talking about the show, and I did say that to her. And but throughout Just Us, I'm interested in the little moments that happen in ordinary conversation that actually speak to deep historical truths. And how you can pull those out, and what kind of shortcuts we take that allow the lie of equality to exist.
Okay. Wow. So in your analysis and critique, as you have allowed us a lens to how you're thinking about this, we cannot neglect that you're a visionary in this, because many of us can't unpack in the way that you do this situation, or a small but very relevant conversation. And so as you're writing about these conversations, American conversations, in your brilliance, what universe or world do you want to allow us to visit with you in this book?
Well, I think anybody can ask questions of what they think they know. Not even of the person they're talking to, of themselves. to just be like, is that true what I'm saying? You should be around our dining room table with, it's my husband, me, my daughter, and Suri, it's like, is that true? Did you just say, can we look that up? Can you look that up? There's a great book I wanted to bring up called Race for Profit by Kianga Yamata Taylor. She teaches she's a professor at Princeton. And it's an amazing book about housing, how Black people were kept away from accruing wealth through housing. And I think it's one of those books that we all should read, because you'll never sit in your house again without bringing the knowledge of what it takes to have a house that you can then pass on to another generation, who can then pass on, and what the accruing of wealth from generation to generation allows for Black Americans. So Race for Profit, everybody get that book, read that book. But in terms of, not everybody might spend their time collecting the kinds of information I spend my time collecting, but we all have the ability to ask questions and to understand that we have not been educated towards reality. We have been educated towards white benevolence. And consequently, we have to be suspect of what we think we know. And so just look stuff up. Like what's, in the piece that I read, what I didn't read was the charts that, are in the pieces themselves. And one of the charts shows the median value of family net worth. For white families, the net worth of, this is from 2019. So the net worth by the Federal Reserve Board, it was put out. If a white family has $171,000 in savings and net worth, then the average Black family has $17,000. And the average Hispanic or Latino family has $20,720. And other or multiple race has 64,000. So one assumes that it's pointing towards Asian families. So, it's important to know that.
Yes.
I'm not suggesting you wallpaper those facts to your your walls, but it will prevent people from making generalized statements that are not true.
Thank you. In Boston, on your point about your charting there, it has been revealed within the last year that that Black families have $8 to what is comparatively a white family in this binary positioning of $250,000.
Exactly.
So yeah, so when we reckon with documents like Juneteenth is here, and we're looking at General Order number 3, and it's talking about the freemen having absolute equality, and are advised to go back to your homes quietly. You ask, where is that math of equality? What is this mathematics of racism, even in the face of an order? And how does this allow us to come to these conversations with any equity? So thank you so much for what you have just revealed to us in terms of how you think about this. And I came across that you taught a course, or I don't know if you still do, in constructions of whiteness. Can you talk to us about how this construction manifests itself, whether we can deconstruct it, and what your students might have shared with you as a learning from how we are thinking through this paradigm and coming to how teachers might even use this subject matter in their classrooms to get to very tough stuff of American history and having these conversations?
That's a great question. The class Constructions of Whiteness I've taught in the last few years at Yale, and my students and I spend maybe 2/3 of the semester going through looking at different categories in terms of thinking about whiteness. Immigration is perhaps the first and most important, because the 1790 immigration law gave white Anglo-Saxon men access to voting and property.
Mm.
So those two things become two of the most important and contested categories that remain relevant today. So we just were talking about housing rights, who gets to live where, who gets to own what. And we know that right now, across the red states, laws are being put in place to prevent, and we can just say it, Black people from voting. You know, that is all that this is about.
Yes.
So if you follow the immigration laws throughout from 1690 onwards, you will be able to track at what point who gets access to this democratic system.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the amendments that close the doors even as they're opening. To prevent, if you know, which is what we saw right during the last election in Georgia. We have grassroots groups, Stacey Abrams, getting people to exercise their right to vote, and then that election being contested, and now laws being put in place to prevent equal access to voting. So that was a big category for us. We also looked at white masculinity, white femininity, how white femininity has been used across time. You know, white women have been able to point to Black men and women at times, and bring in white men to murder them, just out of casual accusations.
Mm.
And that practice, Tulsa, you know, throughout history, and then again on the very day that George Floyd was murdered, we had Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper in Central Park, Amy Cooper calling the police on Christian Cooper and making it up. So we look at the development of white femininity, how it's been used. There's a fantastic critic, Richard Dreier, who talks about that in his book, White. It's fascinating. He even talks about how in the media, white women were given this soft light so that they would kind of float, you know? And so the mythology was both created in the media, underlined in text, and then the power that they were given was supported by white supremacist laws and white men. And that, you know, and then we look at the development of white masculinity. We looked at property, how property worked in this country, how whiteness itself became property. So that even though institutions are just institutions, suddenly people began to talk about certain schools being white. all that meant was a lot of white people were let in and were hired. But the institution itself is an institution. You can't, it cannot hold whiteness, but the assumption was that only white people get to go there. Only white people get to play tennis. Only white people, and then when you had people like Serena Williams coming into a sport that was dominated by whiteness, you could you could literally document, as I tried to do in Citizen, the kind of abuse that they had to negotiate, even with all the winning ways that they had, even though they were better than, on top of, it didn't matter. So we look at the role of whiteness as property. So those were the kinds of, I'm not going to go through every single category, but those were some of the things that we addressed. And from the students, a lot of the students, it was an interesting class. Many of my mixed race students had white mothers and Black fathers, and they all started the class thinking that they were going to write about their white mother, but none of them did. In the end, they all switched. And I found that interesting, that there was a way in which they weren't able to separate the love of their mother with the category of white women. And so they, 2-1, they all switched. But people with 2 white parents, white students with 2 white parents, many of them did critiques of their own families and interviewed their families regarding how they understood their whiteness and how, if you are, and, white people, if you're white Anglo-Saxon, WASP, you're always white. But if you were ethnic white, Italian, Irish, you had to come into whiteness in the United States. You were considered Black when you first came here, even on some passports. And so it wasn't until there was an umbrella of Caucasianness that those other Mediterranean, other kinds of people were allowed into the white Anglo-Saxon world of whiteness,
So as a designer of your classroom and how you get people to respond to you in the ways that you have just let us in on, and your language that you use as a wordsmith, the vocabulary expansion that you have just even laid out for us just now is amazing. And we're in this space in America that is really, really challenging in the 21st century. And looking at the possibility of having tools that will help us to have better conversations, that will at least have us to come to the table. What are those tools as you approach it from the experience of your conversations in Just Us, that would allow us to be in the same room together, that would allow us to focus in on productive conversations? What are some of that you might share with us from your book and from what you have gleaned as an experience of even the courage to foster these conversations?
Well, I think what I hope the book did was show that the willingness to have the conversation is really a willingness to ask questions and to be curious, from both positions, both as the listener and as a speaker, and also to know that I think there are people in the world who are dedicated to violence and the erasure of other people. But then I think a lot of other people are ill-educated. And because the education system was set up that way. I mean, they're trying now, in many places, many universities that receive state funding, they're saying if you teach race and ethnicity, they will cut your funding. So again, they're attempting to silence our education. So I think we should all go in knowing that there's no harm in not knowing. The harm really is in not wanting to know.
Mhm. Okay.
And if we go forward with curiosity, and I think we all have to understand that we are in this thing together. This is our country. This is the United States of America, and we're an American. And so if we do not sort of get together and start talking and understand how whiteness is being used to eradicate certain parts of the conversation, by the time it comes home to roost, it will be too late for all of us.
Mm.
For all
Okay.
of us.
For all
And
of us.
so we really need to see that we're all in this together, and we really have to start righting the wrongs that have been done. It's not a question of fighting over whether the wrong has been done. The wrong has been done.
Mhm.
We know it, we see it. The police are gunning down Black people. We see it. So let's stop having those conversations of whether or not it's happening and start moving into more productive conversations about maybe why it's happening and how it can be changed. And, I think, and some of that has to do with education. I mean, we have to eat a little humble pie and realize we need to kind of back up and figure out what we don't know. And in that way, we're all, super smart people. So we can be each other's resources.
That's a great concept. Uh, as you crafted Just Us, an American Conversation, I noticed that the format of the design of the book was a little different. And in terms of images that you use that take us on this visual journey to your conversation, what was your process in deciding to use the format that you did as a way of seeing and for us to see what you were presenting? Can you take us into your decisions on crafting your book this way?
Mm-hmm. I mean, this was a really difficult book to work on. There were so many moving parts. I was thinking I'm so glad I'm talking to you, because you of all people would understand. It was like bringing together a weaving collage, that had to build its structure. And I was more interested with this book in the process than I was actually in the content. It's, to me, Just Us is a book that was trying to enact a process to sort of show how thinking works. What does it mean to say something and then to question whether or not that statement really is grounded in historical fact?
Mm-hmm.
And what are those historical facts, and how can I show them right away? And to show that either the statement wasn't quite right, or and have it be visually present so that the reader could just look over to the verso side of the page and check whether or not what I'm saying actually is supported by historical or visual fact. And so I decided, why not bring it, right over from the recto to the verso page, so that the eye patterns would have to go back and forth. And Yeats, the poet Yeats said, that the poem, even though these are not poems, they're conversations, but that the poem failed if all the stitching and unstitching, he says, all the stitching and unstitching will be for naught if it doesn't seem a moment's thought. And so I really wanted the essays to come out of real conversations. Not academic, you know, you can, if you really want to read an academic book, you can go get it. But I wanted this to be in the day-to-day of our lives. Like, what does it mean to be in a conversation where you're sitting in a theater with somebody and the play asks white people in the audience to do something, and the woman you've come with and the woman you're sitting with refuses to do it. What do I do? What do I say? What does she say? What do we do? I wanted that to play itself out on the page. And even as it's playing itself out, I wanted to bring in Audre Lorde's conversations about what it means for Black women and white women to talk from the different positionalities in which they said. And so I ran the Audre Lorde paragraphs up against that discussion around going to the theater with my friend. But, you know, but it had to say the stitching and unstitching would be for naught if it seemed clumsy. So I had to come up with a sort of easy way to do that.
Okay, so as you have already answered one of my questions, and that was, you know, what do these conversations reveal to you, and what could we take from your having this experience is about not being fearful of asking the questions, not being fearful of being at the table and opening up. And so the theater with which this book presents us is one to open ourselves up to, and looking at your mastercraft of lyricism, how you present the lyrics in the book Citizen, and how it presents almost like a stage for us to operate on, to be there, to be present. What about, as the phrase, pull the lyric back into its realities in Citizen, suggest maybe by just us in American Conversation, a reinvention in this conversation? What would you, I often think about the work of Lucille Clifton, as she refers to shape shifting. Is this something that we're participating in now on our way to renewal? What are the possibilities we have with respect to pulling back into the reality, the lyric? So I hope I'm clear there. If I need to restate it.
No. Oh yeah. I mean, this book, I wanted it to present a process, not a text, if that makes sense. I wanted the reader to go away from it, and then the next time they had a conversation, they would think, oh, I could ask this question, and I should look this up. And I could say, do you know that in Boston, the median income for Black families is $8? Did you know that? You know, like, I wanted to perform something that could be performed.
Okay.
To open a door into a way that it's not the only way that conversations can go, but it's a way. And in order to do that, we would have to have a little bit of self-consciousness around who we were and what we were saying when we were saying it. Yes. And so the book tries to enact a kind of self-consciousness. And also, you know, I'm a real advocate for talk therapy, psychoanalysis. And I really believe that Richard Wright in 1940s, he worked with a number of psychoanalysts to start something called the Lafarge Clinic. And Ralph Ellison was also involved in it. He writes about it in an essay called Harlem is Nowhere. And one of the things that those clinics offered communities was the ability for people to talk things out, and with professional listeners, you know. And those clinics were in, that clinic was in the basement of the church from 1940s to the mid 1950s. and then it went away. Community analysis went away. But I feel like the biggest gift we can give ourselves and others around us is the gift of communication. Nobody can be in your head. Nobody knows exactly what you know and what you need and what you want. And we have to stop being afraid of communicating those things. And we have to understand that sometimes communication will come with consequences, but we take those consequences because the communication might be more important than the consequences, you know?
Yes.
So I wanted the book to say, look, why don't we start with our questions? Why don't we allow ourselves, give ourselves the gift of being able to ask the questions in the boardroom, in the faculty meetings, in, you know, and not let the structure silence us, not let accusations of uncivilness silence us. Civility has been used to silence people, and then other people do whatever they want.
Mhm.
And we cannot be in collusion with our own devastation.
Okay.
We really have to stop.
Do have to stop. This brings me to the moment that I found a passage that many people may already know from 1785 that Thomas Jefferson wrote on Notes on the State of Virginia, where he is saying that Phillis Wheatley certainly was not a poet.
Exactly.
Because Blacks could not have an imagination. And
Mhm.
here, arcing centuries to you, we see the revelation of imagination exploding across the page, in much the same kind of reveal that a Phyllis does, but this canon of literary genius being represented in available ways that defy some of the documents historically we have had in our midst. Can you speak to how, in understanding more about our radical imaginations, we can press this point of possibilities in these conversations?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But first, let me read in Just Us. We have an erased section of Notes from Virginia, and the last section is that section you referred to. He says, some, meaning some Blacks, have been liberally educated. They will creon out an animal, a plant, or a country for us to prove the existence of a germ in their mind, which only wants cultivation. But never yet could I find that a Black had uttered a thought above the level of plain narration. Never see even an elementary trait of painting or sculpture. In music, they're more generally gifted than the whites, with accurate ears for tune and time. Misery is often the parent of the most affecting touches in poetry. Among the Blacks is misery enough, God knows, but no poetry. It could not produce a poet. So that was the section in which he was referring to Phillis Wheatley. Her work was brought to him to show him what she had done, and he was like, she's just mimicking the abolitionists who taught her. She cannot think for herself. And this is from Thomas Jefferson, apparently our big savior, you know, who was walking around Europe telling people that slavery should end. But in terms of the radical imagination, you know, there's the work of Bell Hooks has been very important to me. And one of the things she says is that even marginalized, that the place of the margin can be a place of radical openness. that you can be in the margin and it can give you possibilities of thought, possibilities of movement that maybe being in the center would have locked you down. You know how people get, the more they get, the more concretized they get.
Yes.
And they forget. And so much of what has happened in this country in the last year that has been liberatory has come from grassroots organizations around the country. The development of Black Lives Matter since the killing of Trayvon Martin, and then all of the other offshoot groups that have come up through that, Say Her Name, Kimberly Crenshaw's organization, you know, all of those movements have allowed for the big thinking that has led to so much conversation that's going on right now around the reformatting, the reconsideration of institutions, institutionalized racism, the lack of equity across this country. So I think that is coming from people who were pushed to the margins and who had to make another way. And in making that other way, had to look at the entire picture, the big picture, and see what could be done. And, you know, there's a way in which, I forget who said it, but I remember once reading that any kind of movement in the United States would have to take a leap. It would have to be a kind of surrealist leap. It had to make a jump that jumped, that literally jumped. And I see, one of the things that gives me hope right now is that I see so many pushing for that jump, that movement forward, despite everything.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, we have to be thankful for groups, people like Stacey Abrams. People say, well, you know, she's part of the system. I'm like, no, she is a woman who was part of a grassroots movement, who managed to give our present Democratic administration a chance to make changes. And so you know, that's what I have to say about that.
Well said. I will say that, and when you speak of institutions, as you were being introduced by Arlene, she made reference to a racial imagery institute, that Racial Imaginary Institute. Can you tell us more about that? What you're hoping as a goal to achieve, or have the work that you have done in it, and how you're connected to that as accessible public and collectivity.
Well, the Institute is a collection of basically curators. And what we do is curate shows in which the role of white supremacy remains part of what is being looked at. So that, I mean, you know, we have gone through centuries where that incredibly important piece is left out. So suddenly we have racism, but no racists. We have sexism, but no sexists. You know, and you're like, well, how are you going to fix a thing if nobody is responsible for the thing? And so we've been curating shows and having discussions and having people come and talk, and mostly in New York and in LA, because we that's where the connections are. But if you were in Kansas and wanted to be part of the Racial Imaginary Institute and curate a show in Kansas, we would put all our support behind you. We don't care where you come from. Anyone can join. it's a completely open and equal platform. You could be there for 4 years, you could be there for 10 days. If you want to do something and we can support you, we do it. And so now we're gearing up for every 2 years we do a symposium and a series of gallery shows and a film series dedicated to a theme. The first one we did was dedicated to whiteness. This one is looking at nationalisms, nationalism, borders and belonging. The title is How Do We Form a We? What is a we?
Yes.
We use the quote from Paul Chan, is there a way home that isn't backwards?
Wow.
So that's what we're working on now. Those shows should begin next spring and go through the summer and fall. And we will be looking at, what is nationalism? Why are we at the door of fascism right now? Why, like fascism and the United States are like very close cousins, and that door is being pushed down, and so are we going to be able to hold it back? Are we going to be able to restore this country to notions of democracy? I mean, it might have been a failing democracy, but at least it was committed to the idea of a democracy. And now we're saying, goodbye to all that. And we shouldn't passively take it. We should at least be saying, we see what you're doing.
Okay. Well, in that vein, thinking about nationalism and our symbols of the flags and what has been a focus of featuring the Confederate symbols, and just that brings me to Bree Bass, who in South Carolina climbed the pole to take down the Confederate flag. I think it was in 2015. Even knowing that when she arrived at the bottom of it, that she would be arrested.
Yeah.
And what that meant as a symbol of young people understanding Black Lives Matter, understanding the significance of symbols that are poised in the society that don't reflect them as value, as valuable. And then to cite another instance of that same symbol recently on Memorial Day, this past 2021 Memorial Day, there was a veteran in Natick, Massachusetts, who brought to the celebration in Natick a Confederate flag, and his wife had the American flag, and they stood in front on the green of this group of gathered people. He, as a World War II veteran, shaking and holding this flag, was obviously trying to make a point about this symbol and was asked to stop, to leave. And as I listened to the news about this, I was listening for his name. We know Bree Bass. We know her name. We even know that her father, who worked for the Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, was asked to leave his position because unless he denounced his daughter's actions. But this white veteran, we do not know his name. His name was protected. His image was there, but no name. So as we think about this in the constructions, as you name it, constructions of whiteness, are there constructions of Blackness that we can think about? Is that a real term? Is that a reality? Is that a possibility? What do you think about that? Just, I hope I'm not being, verbose in this, but,
No, I think you're right. I mean, constructions of whiteness is exactly that. Why are white people not named? Why are they not named? You know, the artist Alexandra Bell, I don't know if you know her work. She has rewritten the headlines in the New York Times to name people when they have committed offenses. Because when they're white, they go anonymous. And that has led to this benevolence of whiteness, that whiteness is good because we never know, but if it's a Black person, we know everything about them, even when they're children. We have their names, we have, you know, everything. And so the construction of Blackness has been the thing that we have been contesting all of our lives. I think most of us have been in the process, because when white people talk about Black people, they're not talking about actual people. They're talking about a construction, an imaginary construction that they project onto Black people. You know, when the police shoot a Black person and then you ask them, why did you shoot him? He was unarmed, he wasn't doing, why did you do it? The white person says, I don't know. And what he's really saying, there are many videos where you see that. There's one where a white policeman shot a Black man, and the Black man says, why did you shoot me? And the police says, I don't know. I don't know. And it's because, you know, we talk about therapy. You need some therapy because the projections that they have of the construction of Blackness is being projecting onto actual people in front of them. And they're shooting their imaginary. They're not shooting the person, they're shooting, you know, we remember when Michael Brown was shot, Darren Wilson said, what I saw was Hulk Hogan. What I saw was, I think he used the word demon or something. He wasn't seeing a 18-year-old man, boy. He was seeing his imagination of what Blackness is. So that's why that idea that the imaginary is what's controlling the actions of these people. Sometimes they see what they see and they know what they know and they're intentionally killing, you know, they're going out to kill people. But you know, even Philandra Castile in that video, the policeman said, you made me do it. I'm like, nobody made you shoot him 5 times, 5, 6 times. You did it.
Yes.
But out of his mouth came the word, you made me do it, you know? So it's almost like they're taken over by some secret, you know.
Some possession.
Yeah. And some possession.
Yes, yeah. Reflecting on that, looking at Crispus Attucks and the trial of the Boston Massacre, when John Quincy Adams represents the British soldiers as the defense. He says in his defense of that trial in 1770 that they saw, why did they shoot? They saw a big Black man, 6'2", coming at them, and they were fearful. And it actually reinforces how deeply embedded in the psyche that is. I do want to go on to some other questions, but I just wanted to say that I really thank you for that that response, because we've been trying to figure some of these things out, and you're helping us to do that. Esther, go ahead.
You know, the video of Christian Cooper, that video is one of the best videos for showing how somebody, you know, Miss Cooper knew what she was doing. So her consciousness is very clear. She says, I'm going to tell them that you attacked me. I'm making this up. I'm going to do it. And I know how it will play for them. And you are going to be in trouble. you could be killed. She doesn't use those words, but that's the inference. Like, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to say that a Black man is attacking me.
Mm.
Because you and I both know how that plays in the imagination of white America. And I can turn that on when I want to.
Yes.
And I'm about to turn it on now. What are you
Yeah.
going to do about that? You know, so that video is a really interesting video for pulling the wool off the illusion that people don't know that these projections are out there and used to justify violence.
Yes. Well, our last question is from Esther Shapiro. She says, I appreciate your valuing of mental health counseling when centered on recognition of racism and your faith in communication. When you read from Citizen at ICA Boston, and when you read from Citizen at ICA Boston in 2015, you said that you found it to be the most painful incident of racist obliviousness was by a therapist. Suggestions for dialogue? That's the question from the audience.
Well, you know, I'm not shy in saying that I'm a great advocate for therapy, and the reason, when I was told that story by an academic in Northern California, I was shocked because, you know, these people are supposed to be trained to have these conversations, to have difficult conversations. But I think the psychoanalytic community has had a day of reckoning around the ways in which whiteness, the privileging of whiteness, the projections onto Blackness are have not been dealt with inside that discipline. And so white therapists are no more capable of dealing with these subjects with their white patients or their patients of color, Asian Americans, Indigenous Americans, or Latino or Black. And so I just gave a talk to a psychoanalytic community, and they are beginning to do the work because, you know, they're not in some special place in the society. They have come out of the very society that the rest of us are in. And so their inabilities to have these dialogues are an indication of the general society's inabilities to have a dialogue where, you know, whiteness has moved forward with erroneous conceptions of what it is.
Okay, so we want to thank you for your gracious revealing of your thinking on our questions and your scholarship that has been expanding indeed the narrative that we now face that has to widen or we're doomed, and the hope and possibilities that you have contributed to the society. No wonder you are my MacArthur Genius recipient. I cannot say enough about the treasure that you have given us in your way of thinking, your alternative ways of making us challenge ourselves. And on behalf of Bunker Hill Community College and the privilege to be in conversation with you, Dr. Claudia Rankine, thank you so very much. And people, go get the book, go get the book, go get the book.
So thank you. That's a pleasure. It's been my pleasure to talk to you. It's been nice to have somebody who can enter the field equally with as much information. So I feel like I've learned as much as I hopefully have communicated. Thank you, and thank the whole Bunker Hill community for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm humbled by that, indeed. And I will turn it over to Kevin, who will take us away. But thank you for this enjoyable, pleasurable, delightful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone who's with us in the audience. That was a really wonderful session. And there's a lot of thank yous and really expressions of gratitude coming in the chat. I want to share those with both with Claudia Rankine and with Lamerchi Frazier, since you really can't see them, but we have a very receptive audience here and they are saying thank you very much. And I just want to let everyone know that there is a short break now and we're having some networking sessions on the conference site. And we look forward to seeing all of you return at 3 p.m., which is when Joy Hardiman is going to give our final reflections. And then we have some closing things to say as well. So we'll see all of you back at 3 p.m. Thanks once again.
Hope this was recorded. Okay, thank you.